up. All the units.
Sometimes we just needed the J spray.
Definitely shifting gears. Okay. So as the vice president of a dog rescue, most days I felt like I was standing under Niagara Falls, just holding a 5-gallon bucket, trying to save what I could. I would overextend myself if it meant saving the dog. But as a volunteer, the payoff was never a paycheck. Instead, what kept me going was saving dogs from dire situations, getting them healthy, and seeing them adopted into loving homes. So in 2013, we got an urgent plea to save a dog in North Carolina. And back then, most dogs did not make it out of southern shelters due to the supply far outnumbering the local demand. But we had approved adopters waiting for this dog, a young, well-mannered Doberman named Armani. So he had a guaranteed home if we could just get him to Chicago. So despite transports not being my strength, I was voluntold to organize this one. Armani needed a cross-country journey. Back then, there was a network of amazing volunteers, and they were dedicated to driving Dobermans north, but they couldn't cover the 1,000 miles before Armani's time was up at the shelter. So with his days running out, I reached out to a network of small plane pilots. They specialize in moving Dobermans out of high-kill areas, but they typically had a 500-mile limit. But amazingly, one pilot accepted the whole flight, a young guy named Bill who loved to fly dogs to their rescues. So that Saturday, the weather looked clear for January. So Bill and Armani planed up and headed northwest. And about a few hours later, they ran into a sudden storm over Kentucky. And we decided it was best if they landed, spent the night in a hotel, and finished the flight in the morning. Bill texted me pictures of Armani sleeping in the hotel bed. In the morning, the weather was worse, and we couldn't ask drivers to risk it on the road. So Bill and Armani flew back to North Carolina, and we agreed to try again the following weekend. So the next Saturday, the weather looked clear, but windy. So Bill and Armani flew this way again, and the plan was to land at the county airport at 6 that night. So to update me along the way, Bill would descend to 10,000 feet to get a cell signal, and he would call me from the plane. I felt like his co-pilot as he talked to me from the air. At around 3 that night, or 3 that afternoon, he was hollering over the wind and the plane's engines. "Yeah, the winds from the west are strong, but there are no storms ahead. I won't make it by 6, so let's say 9. Okay. Some friends and fellow rescue volunteers lived right by the airport, so we killed time driving around, making a thank you package of Chicago comfort foods. And then we just hung out in their living room, cuddling with their adopted Dobermans until Bill landed. So at 7, Bill calls and he says that the storms are still a major issue, and he extended his ETA another hour. And then he called twice more with similar adjustments. At midnight, I get one final update. "How soon can you be at South Bend?" Thankfully, my friends were up for a late-night rescue road trip and offered to drive. So with the wind at our backs, we made the 125 miles to South Bend in under 2 hours. So we find Bill and Armani in the terminal waking up from a nap. I gave Bill a long, relieved hug. And he was more than happy to eat the now cold Portillo's. Bill told Armani to be a good boy in his new home. We packed up and we made it home by the time the sun came up. The next day, Armani moved into a foster home. He was a little thin and he needed to put on some weight before he could get neutered. But then he'd heal up and he'd go home to his eagerly waiting adopters. But the day after his routine surgery, his experienced foster mom, she realized he wasn't recovering like normal. So he went to the vet for blood work, and his liver and kidney values were not good. So the vet hospitalized him overnight with meds and fluids, and he was optimistic that our boy would bounce back and go home. But in the morning, Armani was dead. And his stiff body was yellow from liver failure. The vet was shocked, and we were all devastated. I've cried over losing hundreds of dogs, but Armani's death shook me. All of that work for worse than nothing. I stayed on as vice president for another 5 years, just trying to save as many dogs as I could until I just couldn't anymore. And most of those days, the nonstop rescue insanity felt like I was flying into the wind. But I kept going as long as I could, and I made the call when it was time to change course. Thank you.
So, for our open mics,